welcome to Invisible Activity, a podcast about discussion and conversation featuring artists, community leaders, and thinkers that are not shown in the mainstream airwaves. Our mission is to uncover the practices of independent makers and scholars and bring it straight to you. In this episode, I am setting the stage for the first unit of our podcast with a train of thought. This train of thought should not be considered a scholarly essay, but rather a set of different ideas strung together with intuition for the sake of meditation, asking questions, and inspiring further research into weird rabbit holes that I get sucked into. It's my version of just showing what I'm interested in. It is a pleasure to have you join me in my disjointed walk across these subjects. If you get interested in some of the topics in this podcast, links related to the sources will be pasted in the video description. Without further ado, let's begin. The year is around 1600 BCE, and the night is clear and still. The light of the moon and the stars shine down the mountainous regions just northwest of what we now call India. A ritual is taking place, and the shaman is drinking a mixture of plants. We do not know what the precise plant species were, but we know that the people in this nomadic group call it soma. It is one of the examples of recorded communication and communion with plants in ancient human texts. Soma was simultaneously a plant, a god, and a state of being. Whoever took the drink communicated with Soma and took part in its plant consciousness. There are some modern examples of this, like when the late speaker Terence McKenna would discuss about talking with mushrooms when referring to taking psilocybin. This is a question that I ask myself on occasion. Can we talk to plants? When humans across the globe drink or smoke entheogenic plants, are they just having a trip? Or are they participating in a communion with the consciousness of the plants themselves through the chemical structure of their active chemicals? The Indo-Aryan people of Central Asia are not the only ones who refer to plants as living, thinking entities. The healers and shamans of northern Mexico, Central America, and the Amazon rainforest all also used to refer to certain plants as both a plant and a conscious entity, sometimes even giving them anthropomorphic forms. I want you to suspend your disbelief for the duration of this podcast. If you can, make the effort to consider, what if vegetation, in its own way, can think, can talk, can interact with other vegetation, or even animals? What if plants are not only living beings, but free agents with their own mode of conscious thought? Can we extend those properties to fungal organisms too? How about bacteria? How about to the smallest iota of life that just barely was emerging into existence nearly 3 billion years ago? Humans have come a long way in our way of thinking. We can say that we, as a Western culture, have started out as thinking of ourselves as the center of the universe, as the only animal endowed with soul and reason in a sphere fixated at the center of the cosmos. Gradually, we have come to decenter ourselves from that position. Our planet is just one of many circling around the sun, and that sun is one of many suns orbiting around the Milky Way galaxy. And just about a century ago, our Milky Way was discovered to just be one galaxy in a universe that holds trillions. Physically, we can say that we have thoroughly stepped away from the center stage of the cosmos. But in regards to mind, experience, and aesthetics, we still seem to hold a monopoly, as we seem to ascribe this property to nothing else. The Cartesian dualism of the 17th century is a prime example. I think, therefore I am. My mind is in here with me, and the material world is out there, devoid of this interiority of conscious experience. Even if we have lost faith in the idea of an eternal soul and think our consciousness is held by the brain, this paradigm is still alive today. We seem to reserve the given of this classification of conscious interior experience only to a relatively few clades of animals. And even then, humans are the only animals on the planet that can act as free agents. Other animals, in our modern view, are just following instinct and are devoid of conscious participation in life or decision making. Any decisions that they ostensibly make is due to their own following of their own instincts, not an actual recent result of a process of thinking. We don't really think that animals can think outside of themselves or project their mind onto the world. We simply think that they're just following their instincts. But what if the mushroom hears this and quietly reverberates in its own version of laughter? Alfred Whitehead was a mathematician and philosopher in the early 20th century that believed in Panpsychism, the idea that all matter, all quanta, holds the properties of conscious experience. This idea, while controversial, has gained the attention of prominent contemporary thinkers like David Chalmers and Sir Roger Penrose, just to name two. In Panpsychism, all matter, down to the subatomic quarks and electrons that make up atoms, has a very primitive, basic, and small iota of conscious experience, or the property that allows it to exist. Does this mean that atoms have thoughts? That electrons and photons have conversations? No, it does not. But it does mean that these discrete units of conscious experience form systems and larger units. For example, protons and neutrons make an atom makes a molecule, molecules make protein structures, and so forth. And these systems form ever more complex forms of conscious experience through the relationship of their parts. Some ideas about panpsychism, like how it's actually working or how actually matter comes together to form more complex forms of consciousness, is still controversial, but the idea is there, and some support is gaining for it. In the minds of some, reality is not then a cold, unthinking, dead heap of matter, but rather a full pleroma of processes and relationships that meet, interact, fight, collaborate, and connect to form different complex forms of conscious experience. In this context, Whitehead calls all levels of matter, down to its quantum building blocks, organisms, as they form living, active relationships with dynamic processes, just like you would see in biology. The ultimate science is not then physics, but ecology. There is an ecology of the biosphere, an ecology of the city, and now an ecology of the atomic and quantum worlds, according to Whitehead. Since the 19th century, we have thought of values, meaning, and aesthetics as a purely human set of experiences. And that intuition has been carried to this day. In his book, The Moral Landscape, Sam Harris posits that morality can be defined scientifically, since morality is a measure of well-being, and well-being is determined by the states of human brains. Morality, to Harris, is encased inside the skulls of human beings. To ascribe properties of meaning, morality, and value-making to things outside the bony encasing of the brain sounds counterintuitive and absurd in scientific circles. But animism was a common, almost universal paradigm across world cultures in the ancient and pre-modern world. From Japan to the Central Asian steppe, from the Berbers of North Africa to the Dravidian people of South India, from the Latin and Etruscan people of ancient Italy to the various tribes in the American continent. For a large part of history, the humans believed themselves to be on the same ontological footing as the rest of the matter in the world. Everything else in the world, from rivers to rocks to trees to plants to shrubs to cliffs to even canyons, held a certain degree of spiritual properties, consciousness, if you might want to call it that. In this animist view, and in the view of thinkers like Bruno Latour, we are all participants in a larger environment filled with free agents who are entitled to their own existence, their own values, and even their own political rights. Even if Bruno Latour is not a panpsychist, he still believes that ecosystems should be considered free agents and that they should be given at least some political representation. The non-human is as creative, as active, as intelligent as the human. Even if we cannot imagine what the intelligence of a river would be like, cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman explains that the only reason we cannot understand the intelligence of that river or any other ostensibly inanimate matter is because our brains have evolved to not notice such activity because it simply does not lead us to physical preservation of our bodies. And yet, even if our distant ancestors couldn't see it, they still ascribed a certain spiritual life and agency to the matter and geological formations all around them. What has changed since then? The answer is very complex, and I would have to focus on just one aspect of human development in this podcast. Of course, a lot of things have changed since our nomadic days before cities and agriculture, but the growth of civilization will give us a starting point. As civilizations grew out of nomadic tribes and foragers and hunters, the number of human beings began to skyrocket. As agriculture became the norm throughout the millennia, civilized people began to take shelter in cities, The undeveloped organic biosphere began to seem as a twofold dimension, at the same time a dangerous expansive void and a pool of natural resources. As early as the Bronze Age, and even some centuries prior, we see an active collecting and use of natural resources on a mass scale across civilized areas. This was a different relationship between the human and the planet. The human was on a higher order, and the planet was here for our use and our bounty. Abrahamic religions play on this theme quite heavily. This relationship reaches a climax during the Enlightenment and the coming centuries, up until today even. As the Enlightenment period focuses on the individual, his rights, and his place on the social order, we begin to see the birth of modern capitalism, scientific industrialism, and unfortunately, the exploitation and subjugation of the ecosystem and entire groups of non-European people. While entire people were subjugated and ecosystems were damaged, European and North American people not only saw a skyrocketing of their wealth, but an immense swelling of their caloric intake. Gout, a disease known for being caused by high-fat foods and excessive drinking, was considered a mark of nobility in some places in Europe. And this is what I want to bring your attention to. Civilization brings forth culture, knowledge, science, art, and order, but it also brings out class division, subjugation, and most importantly, a concentration of energy in the form of food in urban centers and farms. This is what's called the thermodynamics of society, to put it in a very simplistic way. A lot of factors drive civilization forward, but one of the most overlooked is how a society is able to extract nutrients and calories from its environment, store them, and use them. It's a good way to see how we have shifted from a state of equilibrium to an unbalanced state, where our caloric intake is much higher than the land can easily replenish. We take this for granted because to us, getting our nutrition and calories is as easy as going to the supermarket, picking out the food we like, and paying for it. But the production of all that food takes a level of effort, resources, and workers that is staggering, to say the least. It's no surprise to me why we started to forget about the free agency of the biosphere and its denizens. We have been playing the game of caloric concentration for over 5,000 years. For our current mode of production and existence to be maintained, it is necessary that we see the rest of the biosphere not as entities with free agency, but as valuable resources to be used by us. And in this sense, we are still firmly ingrained in the center of the universe. We might not matter on the cosmic scale, but our profit margins and food security come very close. If we were to see the rest of the biosphere as a set of free agents with morals, their own consciousness, and their own societies, subjugating them and abusing their ecosystems would make us aggressors to a degree that we probably would not be comfortable with. I've taken us on this trip across history and strange theories about consciousness, and this is because I want to use this podcast to bring new ideas for social progress to you, even if they are weird and unintuitive. Although I'll warn you that I am a sucker for fringe theories and models. One of the themes we'll be exploring with an amazing group of artists, thinkers, and leaders is permaculture. We will be hearing from people that know a hell of a lot more about permaculture and food gardens than I can hope to know at the moment. But to me, permaculture embodies a lot of the points that I have touched on today. Permaculture is based on an observation of natural relationships and ecologies, and designing food systems that mimic those. It is not just about creating a single crop of food, but a long-lasting, living ecosystem that not only benefits the grower, but is based on the mutual aid of humans, plants, and animals. To me, permaculture is a pragmatic way of recognizing the free agency, rights, and conscious life of the biosphere. It is farming on Gaia's own terms. For example, take hugelkultur. Hugelkultur is a cultivation of food plants in systems of mounds. These mounds are built by placing decaying logs in the pile and covering it with various levels of bacteria-rich soil and mulch. You can then plant a whole community of plants and vegetation on this mound, and it will become a largely independent system depending on how you design it. It'll have its own system of water retainment, nutrient exchange, and beneficial plant relationships. You can have nitrogen-fixing plants that use bacteria to concentrate nitrogen near the surface of the mound, or other plants can use it. You have flowers that attract pollinators, that bring bees and butterflies that help the mound's plants reproduce. You can have fungal networks of filaments that decompose old matter and share those nutrients throughout the entire mound. To you, this might be a quiet, slowly growing mound of legumes, lettuce, and spinach, but that mound is a cosmopolitan system of living relationships. It is an active universe, or more appropriately, an active pluriverse of conscious agents. A properly designed hugelkultur mound can become a self-sustaining organism that can provide food for you with relatively little interference from your behalf. And at the end of its lifespan, the only byproduct of a mound is really fertile soil. This is just one example of how permaculture works. The possibilities of permaculture are seemingly endless, and its place in society should grow for the sake of food justice, non-human rights, and our own evolution towards a fair, more sustainable society. In the coming weeks, Laura and I will be interviewing several people with a background in food justice, food growing, and the effects on its communities. We are very excited to bring you this course, and we hope you join us in the next episode of Invisible Activity. Remember that further listening material will be accessible in the video description. And while you're there, make sure to follow Compound Yellow on Facebook and Instagram, while we post information about our events and programming. This is Gabriel Soto, and you have joined me on one hell of a trip. You have listened to Invisible Activity, and see you next time.